Hello and welcome back to the channel and a short tutorial of sorts on water because this is causing a lot of people a lot of problems and there's good reason for it. However, there are a couple of things that you can do to make life a little bit easier. Now, first of all, water acts the same as on the last game, but it forms differently and there are still some bugs around this. So I anticipate I will end up doing this tutorial again. Now, for those of you who are new, you get the usual kind of ocean-like water, which you can hit on most courses by just dropping the land down. As you can see, we get that type of water, which is kind of wavy, you can't control, and that's what's basically our default water table. Now, supposedly we have a way of controlling this with water level, but it actually does, as far as I can tell, nothing. Um, so that is one way in which you can generate water. However, additionally, we have three kind of areas of this. Firstly, water features are an easy one. So you've got high falls, you can make these raise up. You can make them wider by going into advanced edit, longer, shorter, etc. Now, those take up quite a significant amount of meter. Just be careful when you're using them, and typically newer designers will chuck them everywhere over their courses, whereas more experienced guys won't. High splash does what you'd expect. Now, it's not. Sometimes we'll need raises and lowers, and you'll need to be a little bit careful about where you put it. Again, with this one, you can spin it around. You can't really edit the size of it, which is a shame. Low falls at the moment, I would say, is kind of bugged on flat land because it leaves a shadow. Actually, in the water, it's fine if you've got water behind it, but that's another little bug that they've got to work through. You then have low splash, which does the same as the high splash, and you'd probably not use this one that much. And small ripples, which don't do a whole lot, really. In fact, can't even see where they are. So that's those. But those aren't what you're here for. What you're here for is the running water, which is new and a really cool tool that I think once they get right will be great, and create water body. Now, previously, we'll start with the water bodies. Previously, these used to be water planes, which we had kind of gotten used to and were pretty easy to use. What I would suggest for those of you who are still struggling with this is that you treat everything the same as it was and just try to create a water plane, so a big square, out of these. But ultimately, these will have more functionality for us. Now, where people are getting into trouble is because these will look like this. So I would create something like this, and you then exit out, and you've got this, and it's above the land, and everyone's just confused as to what this is actually doing. Now, what you can do is do it one of two ways. Either put your water body down first and then sculpt around it. So, because obviously we don't want the water being above the land, like that's common sense. I'm going to do a really bad job of this just so you see. Now, something completely unrealistic. So let's say this is a containment reservoir we've built up around it, but we can use that. Now, the benefit of the water spline is that we can then move that, and also one of the things they've given us this time, it's quite hard to find that point, go to here. You may want to just leave a measure tool on your points as well. Now, within that, we get more options. So as far as I can tell, fill depth doesn't do anything. It's always at that level, but I might be wrong. Water edge height doesn't do anything. Disable terrain effects doesn't seem to do anything. And please let me know if I've missed any of these. I haven't used water that much. However, disable surface effects is quite cool. What that does is it gets rid of, you can see the edges, it now goes smooth. Previously, we had to use two water planes to get this effect, whereas now we can do it by the click of a button. Now, up to you where you're going to use this and where you're not. But given that you can terrain paint right up to the edge of water anyway, you can always turn this off. Turn this off so where you are disabling the terrain effects even, and then just paint back around surface effects even, and then paint back around it where you do want it. Would be my suggestion. Finally, we do have flow direction and speed. Now, these were not working in the original, whereas now they seem to have been patched. So you can see that that speed is up. The flow direction, it would be nice if we got like a cardinal direction, I guess, but we can just do it with the numbers and gives you an idea. Now, this will always flow in the same direction, which is not always ideal, and we'll come to that in a bit. So that's one area where people are coming up with problems, is the sculpting part of it. However, one thing you really want to avoid, let's just look at the object meter down here. So water splines can be extremely costly. However, it depends how you do it. What we're going to do is we're just going to compare two splines. So one is going to cover all of this area, 3,683 yards. Okay, costs 0.1%, so negligible. However, we're now going to do another one, which is only going to cover, let's say, a couple of 100 yards. And if we do all of these spline points, look at how much that object meter is now rising. So weirdly, the way the game is calculating it is not by the amount of area that you cover, but by the amount of spline points. So when you are making these, make them bigger over a larger area, but use fewer spline points, and that will really help your meter. So the next bit we're going to look at is the new feature, which is creating this running water. And again, people are coming into problems with it because what they're trying to do is create a nice stream from here to here and then get confused because it's floating above the water. Now, the issue with this is it's doing what you want it to. It is a stream which has therefore got some depth and it is hovering above the ground. You just haven't really understood how they want you to use the tool yet. So what we're going to do is you want to dig out your stream bed first. So we're going to go to, let's say, this brush, drop it down a couple of feet, and we're just going to drag it along and create a stream bed. Nothing particularly complicated. It's not great sculpting. We're literally just clicking and dragging, going from there to there. And we're going to go back in and create our running water spline on top of that. And I would just put a couple of spline points, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now, as you can see, that works significantly better. I'm not saying that it's perfect, because it isn't. Now, you will see these bumps that appear in it. Now, those are because if we look at how I'd sculpted my land, you've got this. So what I would now go about doing is just going and flattening with one of these brushes. Again, it's a little time consuming, but for what you want to do, it's probably worth it. So we're just going to click and drag again and run it down. And basically, the more time you want to spend on this, the better it's going to look. It is kind of effort intensive, but you can see that has softened a lot of those. I might run it down a couple of times. You could do it down certain areas and then go back over. And you could do it with harder flattened brushes as well, and that would make life easier as well. But it's not really that labor intensive. If you look at what I'm doing, it's not taking me too long. The one thing you'd want to be careful with is that this is also softening some of the walls of that stream bed. You can see it's still kind of there. And I am rushing this for the sake of doing a tutorial. So we're going to pop it back down. 1, it's not a great spline point position. 2, 3, 4, and let's do 5. As you can see, much smoother. Now, what this does accomplish is something that we couldn't previously do in the last game. So if we look at the height change, so we're going from here down to here. Now, it may only be negligible, 4.9, but it's followed that pretty well. What we can also therefore do is just drop this land, and fingers crossed, I haven't tested this bit yet, the water goes with it. So you have much more freedom with this than we ever did before. We can then also, hopefully this works, go into here, change our flow speed. Let's make it run downhill as it would expect to. And there we go. You've got a kind of rapid stream flowing all the way down. The only thing that is slightly annoying with this, which I can imagine people will want to change with, and we would want to see if they could patch this, is the fact that if your stream were to turn, you can only set this globally for the entire spline. So the entire spline is flowing in, say, this direction rather than following the spline, which would be more logical. So hopefully that can be something they look at. Additionally, we can smooth the spline as well if you need to. Now, what I would suggest, given that you've put it below the water plane, I would just make it wider. Now, you can do that with the spline point, so you can make it wider and narrower at points. But to be honest, you probably just want to do it with the path width. Although it would seem that that spline point width has then not gone with it. So once you edit that once, you've got to be very careful with it. And you can see how the terrain effects, or surface effects rather, are acting on this. And again, we, like with the old one, we can disable those by going like this. You could also then decide to split the spline, close the spline, the same sort of things we normally would do. So we can fill it, in which case it's going back up again, which looks horrible. But we want to keep it open. So that's how we would do our running water. And actually, I think it works pretty well once you start doing the pre-sculpting stuff. Okay, so the final thing I wanted to come to was a couple of, like, if not bugs, but wonky things that I've come across. Firstly, with water, it's just you save as much as you can. It's kind of like with everything they bring in that's new to do with splines, there's going to be a lot of things they just haven't found yet. So there will be crashes. They'll work through this like they did with splines last year, but just save as much as you can do. Now, one of the neat things you can do is we can be editing just a single water spline point. And if we just go in and move, you'll notice you can move the entire spline point. You've got lower or raise as an option for the whole thing, or you can move the point. Now, people are finding this difficult to work out where the height is. Well, you have this little blue thing that doesn't actually look, basically, if you look at where the dot is, that's not actually where the height is. It's this blue line here. So let's say we raised this. Now, raising one corner is really tricky. And having dealt with this on Shell Bay, it causes some issues. You can see we can raise just one corner. However, it proves slightly problematic because the way it is tilting is not across the whole spline. It kind of does it where it's bisecting other spline points. So if we drew a line here to here, it's going to raise up to that point, then it's going to be flat. So if you are doing that, you want to play with the spline points. Let's say we then brought this one in. It starts looking even more funky, but it is at least doing it smoothly. So just be mindful if you're using this and kind of starting a lake at one side and transitioning down to another, you're probably going to want to make that spline really, really big so that this area where it's tilted is as big as possible, and certainly moving this point far away. Secondly, you'll also notice that there's this horrible bit on the edge. Now, I don't really know why this is happening, but the thing that's causing this is it's lining up with the water spline point handle. So the way I found of getting around this was just trying to move this way out. And even then, it softens it, but it doesn't solve it. You've still got that line. And we can move this one. And again, you're minimizing the impact, but it is still there, and you'll see it from certain angles. But if you're coming across that, that's kind of what's causing it and how to hide it. Now, lots of these things are not really anything you'd set out to do, more like problem solving of when you see this, that's how you might go around fixing it. But in reality, if you are just doing the usual pre-sculpting and then going from there, it should work for you. Generally, rather than kind of raising or lowering one point, I would probably just do a new spline. It seems to be working a little bit better. I think that is just about everything I've covered. Like I say, I'm anticipating that they might patch this and make it easier to use, but I think it's working, broadly speaking, as intended. It's just that we're not used to it, and we want water planes back because that's what we are used to, rather than necessarily getting used to this one. Hopefully that helps. If there's anything I haven't covered that you'd like to know about, please pop it in the comments. See you soon.